Here's what you need to understand. A while back, Kamala Harris went to a technology conference, and she said this.
You know, we have to stay woke. Like, everybody needs to be woke. and you can talk about if you're the wokest or woker, but just stay more woke than less woke. Yeah.
We got to stay woke. Well, she picked about the wokest pick she could find, and remarkably, the message Kamala Harris has chosen to send is Jews are not allowed. This is not Al Gore and Joe Lieberman's Democratic Party anymore. This is the party of Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib and Jamal Bowman of anti-Semites. Now, this is so important. I've been telling you this, and this makes it even more clear to me that I was right. I have said now repeatedly, I'm going to repeat myself again, it's that important. 2 weeks ago, Benjamin Netanyahu came to the United States to address Congress and met privately with Kamala Harris. He went back to Israel and promptly began an assassination campaign targeting people in Gaza, in Beirut, in Damascus, and Tehran, wiping out their enemies ruthlessly, efficiently, and quickly. And I've been wondering, what in God's name did Kamala Harris convey to him that signaled, I better get this over with in case she wins? Well, now we know. She is decidedly anti-Semitic in her pick for her vice president. She rejected Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania, who served as a volunteer in the Israeli Defense Force, and scrubbed that from the internet and apologized for being pro-Israel. Literally, they did a struggle session with Josh Shapiro, making him apologize for being pro-Israel, and they still rejected him. That's how anti-Semitic the Democratic Party has become. He had 18 electoral college votes in Pennsylvania, a must-win swing state for the Democrats. Donald Trump still has many more paths to victory, and Harris rejected him because the anti-Semites in the Democratic Party said they would oppose her and riot in Chicago. So she gave the anti-Semites a heckler's veto with Tim Walz, who is super, super progressive. If you don't believe me on the anti-Semitism, well, here's Van Jones on CNN.
Do you think it was a little risky, though, Van, that she didn't go with Shapiro to kind of lock down Pennsylvania? I mean, yes, David Challenger was saying earlier, just because you pick him as your running mate doesn't mean you automatically win Pennsylvania. I think it would have helped just a little bit.
Hey, listen, the conservatives, the right wing, the Republicans, they were chewing their fingernails down to the knuckle because they were afraid of a Josh Shapiro. They were afraid of a Mark Kelly. They're not as afraid of this new governor because they think they can define him. So here's the challenge you've got in this party. And people don't want to talk about it. We got to talk about it. On the one hand, you have a lot of young people who are concerned about Gaza. You have a lot of Muslims and Arabs and others. They have not felt seen by the Biden administration. You start hearing that genocide joke. That was building. And so those folks needed to have a candidate that they could feel comfortable with. This helps them in that regard. But you also have anti-Semitism that has gotten marbled into this party. You can be for the Palestinians without being an anti-Jewish bigot, but there are some anti-Jewish bigots out there. And there's some disquiet now, and there has to be. How much of what just happened is caving into some of these darker parts in the party? So that's going to have to get worked out. It's going to have to get talked through.
Yeah, it absolutely is, because Josh Shapiro was a strategic pick for Kamala Harris, and she rejected him when the anti-Semites of the Democratic Party made it very, very clear that they would protest. And they're all very happy. The Jamal Bowmans, the Ilhan Omars, the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortezes, the far left. What you have to understand is that Kamala Harris scuttled her presidential campaign in 2020 because she was so concerned about what the online left thought. The New York Times, in its postmortem piece on why Kamala Harris lost, said essentially she was too worried about what the progressive fights on social media were and responding to the day-to-day Twitter wars of progressives. She's doing the same thing with Walz, who is super far left. Not only is Tim Walz far left, Tim Walz is a veteran of the United States Army. He re-upped after 9/11, and the moment they ordered him to Iraq, he retired to run for office. J.D. Vance decided to serve and go to Iraq. Tim Walz bailed on his command, when they sent him to Iraq. He refused to go to Iraq. He retired, put in his retirement after they told him he was going to Iraq, and got out before having to go. J.D. Vance went. Walz bailed on his platoon and then decided to run for office. That's the sort of man he is. Like Kamala Harris, a career political opportunist wanting to climb the ladder. He got back in as a show so he can say, I re-enlisted after 9/11. When they decided to send me to Iraq, he jumped back out and ran for office and said, I'm a veteran. Yeah, a veteran who refused to go with his platoon to active duty combat so he could run. He's in favor of sanctuary cities.
Should Minnesota be a sanctuary state?
If the definition of that is that the federal government enforces immigration law and local law enforcement enforces local law, then yes.
Should cities be allowed to be sanctuary cities?
Yes, local control.
Local control, yes, and states as well, sanctuary cities. He also believes that socialism, where the government forces you to give up your money for others, is just neighborliness.
But we can get out there, reach out, make the case. And for one thing, don't ever shy away from our progressive values. One person's socialism is another person's neighborliness.
One person's socialism that uses government force against you is another person's neighborliness. He also supported giving illegal aliens driver's licenses in Minnesota, signed a law, made a big deal about it.
It's done.
A packed room at the St. Paul Armory erupted after the governor's signature made driver's license for all the law of the land.
Not only that, but he also said that he would invest in a ladder company if Donald Trump built a wall to try to bring illegal aliens into the country.
And I think seeing a plan that's out there, talking about it with folks, knowing that he's not going to do anything. He talks about this wall. I always say, let me know how high it is. If it's 25 feet, then I'll invest in the 30-foot ladder factory. That's not how you stop this.
I'll invest in a 30-foot high ladder factory if he builds a 25-foot high wall, just so I can keep the illegals coming here. He's also been really bad on China. He had taught as a school teacher in China when he was in Congress in 2019. He said, despite the Chinese running concentration camps, it was a complicated situation and we needed to understand China and not have an adversarial relationship with him.
We've been focusing on, and I lived in China, and as I said, I've been there about 30 times, but if someone tells you they're an expert on China, they're probably not telling you the truth, because it's a complex country. But it's critically important for us. I don't fall into the category that China necessarily needs to be an adversarial relationship. I totally disagree.
Totally disagree. It doesn't need to be an adversarial relationship. This man is a hyper-progressive fan of China, despite their running concentration camps, despite their spying on the United States. But it goes beyond that. He's also signed into law a safe haven statute that if your state doesn't allow a child before puberty to transition, you can take the child to Minnesota and hide there, and Minnesota will not only protect the child, but will also pay for the child's gender transition.
And what we want to say is we're there to protect children. We're there to have you understand that in Minnesota you're going to be protected. And I just want to be clear. I will never understand what goes into the thinking of these folks to bully these children. That is not impacting them in one bit and making it a living hell for children, for families, for adults, for folks who are just trying to bring themselves in. So in Minnesota, we're making it very clear we're not going to cooperate with these folks. We're not going to extradite people. We're going to say that this is a place where you can come to make these decisions. The community, the trans community is as terrified as they've ever been. We've seen attacks across the nation, even here in Minnesota.
So these children, no one, why these children don't harm these. These children are going to be irreversibly harmed by zealots, and Tim Walz wanted to make it possible. He also signed into legislation a law declaring abortion a fundamental right in Minnesota. Tim Walz also taxes senior citizens' Social Security benefits, one of only 10 states that does, and he upped the tax increase on senior citizens. During COVID, no less, he jacked up taxes. Not just on senior citizens, on everybody, but also on senior citizens. Perhaps most damning of all is Tim Walz's response to the summer riot season in 2020. After George Floyd, Tim Walz went into the street and with a piece of chalk on June 3rd, 2020, wrote, "Justice now." And then the riots began. And small businesses across Minneapolis began burning to the ground. And Tim Walz refused to call in the National Guard to help stop the rioting. This is a montage put together at the time of Tim Walz's failures in the summer riot season.
We are seeing such damage and destruction throughout Minneapolis and St. Paul. Things have gotten so out of control, it is hard to understand.
It's been a chaotic, at times violent day in South Minneapolis, turning into a situation unlike anything we've ever seen in our community.
From Chopper 5 up above, we can see the plume of smoke drifting towards downtown Minneapolis.
Started vandalizing the building, shattering a window, spray painting squad cars.
We are asking the governor, we're asking Mayor Fry, what is the plan here?
We saw people throwing rocks at police cars, at the precinct building.
This has gotten so out of control, it is definitely not a safe situation for anyone.
The tragedy would be if one of these dumpster fires spreads to one of those big apartment buildings or some of these homes, and then you can't get a fire truck down the street.
Please, Governor Walz, Mayor Fry, explain to us what the plan is.
We've seen protesters attacking police, defacing buildings, and looting from businesses.
The place is completely trashed. A lot of stuff has been hauled out of there. Sadly, no police presence in that area whatsoever.
I'm just so baffled. If this is being in charge, this is not a good look.
There is oil, there are chemicals, there are paints, all sorts of things that are combustible and that could really cause a huge explosion.
People are scared and people are angry and people want to hear from their governor.
If the governor and the mayor are not going to take care of this problem, people will. People will uprise over this.
This is a fail. I mean, this is an abject failure. I just don't think there's any other way to put it. You know, like I said earlier, the house is on fire. Will you please tell us if the fire department's on its way? I mean, is anything going to happen here? We're just going to let this burn.
That's Tim Walz's record. As governor of Minnesota, he let Minneapolis burn. He refused to call in the National Guard to help local law enforcement. They were begging him to. He let it burn. And then Kamala Harris raised bail money to get those rioters out of jail. It's the perfect progressive ticket. She picked him because of anti-Semitism on the left. She picked him because he's on the side of the rioters and he's on the side of the illegal aliens. And he didn't just do that. He went on television with a reporter and lied about COVID lockdowns, insisting kids only missed 10 days of in-school learning, which wasn't true. In Minnesota, they were out of class for a year because of his mandates.
Would you have done the schools any differently? Because I think that's where a lot of parents are upset about what happened with the schools.
Well,
do you think you could have made any other choice?
Well, I think, just to be clear, over 80% of our students missed less than 10 days of in-class learning. The vast majority of students were in. It depended, again, on population density. Many of these decisions were being made by local folks to be able to do what was necessary to keep them there. I think, again, in hindsight, if we could have known that we would get vaccinations out as quickly as possible, we prioritized teachers and the staff in schools to get there. We're doing it differently now.
We're doing it differently now. That 10 days of in class, he's counting the Zoom lectures kids went through from home as in class time. Tim Walz not only shut kids out of school for a year and imposed mask mandates, Tim Walz was allowing bars to open but forcing churches to close. That's right. In Minnesota, bars could be open during COVID. Churches were forced by the state to be closed. That's Tim Walz's Minnesota. He burned it to the ground, shut Christians out of churches, kept kids out of school, and now he's the pick because he's not Jewish. This is not Al Gore and Joe Lieberman's Democratic Party. This is the Democratic Party of the far left.